Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. Boy, it is another just beautiful winter day here. Birds are out, frogs are out. Everything seems to be coming alive out here. So happy to be back out on the trail looking to see what we see in the way of mushrooms. So thank you all for joining me. And boy, if you're liking these videos, give me a like, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, let me know your thoughts. Really helps the channel grow, and love hearing from you all. So let's jump into the forest. Let's see what we see. Moving just down the trail here, something catching my eye. Just kind of still be very easy to miss, but just in the sunlight down here, I notice a small little mushroom. Let's zoom in and take a look. So look at that. Very cool mushroom. This is going to have a leathery texture, and it feels furry to the touch. So it's got these fine little velvety hairs on it. If we take a look underneath this mushroom, we notice that it's a pored mushroom. So we see that pored surface there. This is what's commonly referred to as the tiger's eye, Coltricia perennis. And boy, just a beautiful mushroom. This is in its early stages, so this will get bigger from here. And sometimes I'll notice or I'll observe the caps of these actually fusing together. But notice how this is all growing from a single stalk here, or a single stipe. And the pores are actually decurrent or running down that stipe. Now, what sets this apart from other pored mushrooms that you're likely to encounter in the forest is that this one is actually not saprophytic. So most of our pored mushrooms are conchs and different pored mushrooms. Even if they're stalked pored mushrooms or stemmed, they're going to typically grow from dead or decaying wood. Whereas this one is very, very different in that regard. So this actually is an Ectomychorrhizal mushroom that has associations with all of the neighboring trees in this forest. So very unique for pored mushroom. And again, really beautiful to look at. This is going to grow and it's going to get considerably larger, and more likely to see more and more of these as we get deeper into the season. This is not necessarily an uncommon mushroom. It can be easy to overlook, especially in these younger stages, but boy, really excited to see this out here. So this is, again, the tiger's eye, Coltricia perennis. Always a pleasure seeing this one. And just off the trail here, growing from a salmonberry bush, we've got a grouping of a really beautiful mushroom that we featured a week or two ago. This is what's typically referred to as the fairy parachute, Marasmiellus candidus. And notice how we've got these very widely spaced gill pattern that's just beautiful. If you're able to look closely, you may see little veins running, across between the actual gills. Also notice on that larger, more mature mushroom, we've got kind of a darkening of the stipe, so you can see how that's turning like a gray, blackish color. That's very typical of these. So very beautiful mushroom. Awesome name too, the fairy parachute. And very common out here. So keep your eyes peeled for this. You'll almost certainly see it. And this one growing from salmonberry. Delicate little white mushroom. We've got another one over there that's got a nice example of that darkening stipe or stem, which can be a good way to identify the older species if you have any doubts. So very cool to see. Always love seeing this one. So I was just coming up the trail here and something caught my eye. So I was actually admiring this Stereum up here. We've talked about this in previous videos, this false turkey tail Stereum genus, which is a very common sight out here. And as I was looking at that, something else on this hardwood caught my eye. So you may notice underneath there a bright white mushroom. If we follow this log down and we look down here, we see a lot more of it. I was absolutely shocked to see this, because here we are in February, and believe it or not, this is a very fresh fruiting of oyster mushrooms. And you can see a lot of them are just starting to come out. So this is Pleurotus genus, the first oysters of the year that I've encountered. So super excited about this. I'm gonna actually harvest these for sure. So I'm sure this is a familiar sight to a lot of you who are out looking for mushrooms. You know that these can sometimes get kind of somewhat buggy, right? So I love when I have the opportunity, especially in these colder months, to kind of catch these when they're first fruiting, because they're less likely to be as buggy. So I'm gonna go ahead and harvest these and bring these home to the table. Super excited. I guess too, it's worth noting, I should pull these out and go through this real quick. So I'm just gonna actually pull them here. And we'll talk about this real quick in case you're new to oyster mushrooms. So notice these decurrent veins that run all the way up the stem. If you smell this, it's gonna have aroma. Give it a quick sniff. Yeah, very pleasant fungal smell. We can see there's a little mite on there, but by and large, these are looking super fresh, super clean. So excited to see these, and yeah, definitely gonna bring these back home. Awesome find. Boy, take a look at those. Just beautiful little fruit bodies. So excited about these, and there will be lots more of these to come. So I left the overwhelming majority, but just took a few little clumps to throw in some eggs tomorrow. Boy, listen to those frogs go. And as I move down this really beautiful game trail, got a little rain coming down here, which is pretty typical this time of year out here in the Pacific Northwest. Notice something up here. So, pretty little mushroom here. This is very common out here. This is in the Nolanea genus. So notice, when you look at this, you'll notice real subtle striation. There it is coming into focus here on the cap. This is a really common sight out here in the Pacific Northwest. Entomomaceae. And again, Nolanea genus, probably best avoided for the simple fact that there are some toxic or poisonous mushrooms that are closely related to this. If I pull this up so that we can just kind of take a look, let me just see here. All right, so here you can see the base stipe. Underneath, so if we were to take this back home and do a spore print with this, we would notice pink spores on this Nolanea. So kind of cool to see this out here this time of year. Fun to see gilled mushrooms, but again, one that's probably best just admired and left here in the woods. Resting on this little log too, I mean, I guess it's worth noting here that we've got a couple different lichen species. So I'm sure several of you realize or recognize that these actually have a definite fungal component. So these represent a symbiotic relationship between both a fungus and an algae. So, and the primary makeup of this is in fact fungal. So these, of course, not uncommon at all here in the Pacific Northwest. I believe this is one of the ruffle lichens. I'm trying to recall which one this is, and I'm not 100% sure. It might be the varied rag lichen. And then back here we've got a beard lichen, also a very common sight, but really cool to think about and to recognize that there's a very strong fungal component to all these lichens that we see out here in the forest. And these can actually be an excellent way of determining local air quality. So these are kind of, you know, a canary in the coal mine, so to speak, for air quality in any given area. So A lot of times these are observed in that way, just when we're studying the local ecology or health of an area in terms of air quality. So very cool thing to note. Just saw it resting right here, so I figured while we're enjoying or appreciating this Nolanea, might as well talk a little bit about lichens. But very cool. So I'm just moving slightly off the trail right now into this beautiful little mossy area full of hemlocks. So these are the western hemlock trees that are predominating in this area. We've got a little ground cover of salal, very common plant out here in the Pacific Northwest. And what you'll notice as you look around at this mossy floor is all these little diggings in those that carpet of moss. So the primary culprit here is looking down watchfully at what I'm doing. Probably a little suspicious. If you look up here, this is what's known as the Douglas squirrel. It's the Pacific Northwest version of a red squirrel. Sometimes these are referred to as chickarees. They tend to be quite vocal. They're kind of like the sentinels of the forest. So a lot of times they'll let everything in the forest know you're around if it's suspicious of you by alarming. So these guys are huge fans of truffles, especially this time of year. And that guy's got a little heft to him. He's got some weight. I'm pretty sure that the way that he's keeping those pounds on here in the winter, part of that diet includes these truffles. So I'm just gonna poke around in this little area, see if I see anything that he left behind. I'm not so much interested in harvesting what he's after, but I'm more just curious to see what type of truffles is this guy after and what can I learn about that whole area or section of fungi. So let me poke around, I'll see what I see. If anything unique catches my eye, I'll get you back on here and we'll examine more closely. So I've just been poking around this area where the Doug squirrel was likely digging up a bunch of truffles. And boy, I've just been amazed at how deep he's going. I mean, some of these holes are really quite far down there. So although I haven't been able to discover any actual truffle pieces or anything, a couple things did catch my eye. So take a look over here. So a couple really cool things. So one was another owl pellet over here. So that's kind of cool to see, right? And that always makes me look up and see what type of perch might be being utilized by an owl in here. That's always fun, just to kind of expand that sense of place. But just up here, this little mossy glen, we've got a hemlock that's fallen down, and something caught my eye here. So check this out. So growing on what looks to be an old red-belted conch. Look at this. Isn't that just amazing? Actually zoom in a little bit more here so that you can see the detail. So a couple weeks ago, we encountered the tapioca slime mold. This is what's called the honeycomb coral slime mold. So another plasmoidal slime mold that is fairly common, that if you look, I bet with time you will find this. Very interesting. What a beauty, right? Look at all those features, just really something. Boy, I love encountering these out here. And again, for those of you that didn't see the video a couple weeks ago, I'd encourage you to check it out. But one of the things that we reference is this is actually not a fungus. This is a plasmoidal slime mold, which is an entirely different sort of thing. It's got a different classification and everything. Not too long ago, these were in the kingdom fungi, but in more recent times that has changed. And these are of particular interest because those of us who are out and about poking around looking for mushrooms tend to encounter these quite often. And boy, they can just really have strange personalities. They move fast. A lot of times you'll see time-lapse photography with several of these different species. So So cool to see. Just wanted to highlight that and point that out to everyone so that you could keep your eye out for these beautiful different plasmoidal slime molds that are crawling around this forest. So keep your eyes peeled. Boy, check this out. So as I was admiring this honeycomb coral slime mold over here, it's kind of hyper focused on this one little spot. Check this out on the other side of the conch. We've got even more. So for whatever reason, this honeycomb coral slime mold is really liking this red-belted conch, the Fomitopsis munciae. So interesting to see. Such a beauty. As I move up the trail here, something caught my eye. Take a look at this. This is a really spectacular growth form of the turkey tail. So sometimes we'll see this coming off in individual little shelf-like bodies off of edges. Other times we'll see these kind of flower-like rosettes. It almost form a conical structure. Really pretty to look at. That's always fun to see. So again, this is one that a lot of folks are on the lookout for. This is Trametes versicolor, the turkey tail mushroom. And if we look up top, we've got, again, kind of banded colors, fine felty hairs, and one of the key distinguishing features from a lot of the lookalikes is to kind of peek underneath and see what we've got underneath. So when you look at this, you really have to squint to see these. We've got very fine white pores underneath. And that's something that virtually all of the turkey tail lookalikes that are around here, whether it's Stereum or Trichaptum or other things, they'll generally lack this fine white pored surface. So good to be on the lookout for. And boy, just such a pretty mushroom. I don't think I'm going to harvest this right now because I've already got an ample supply at home, but again, this is one that I consume pretty regularly in the form of just kind of a slow cooked tea that's kind of left to simmer for a couple hours. All kinds of great benefits from consuming that. So it's been heavily studied and very medicinal. So very cool one to see. Keep your eye out for it. And just remember, lots of different growth forms on this one. So this is kind of a unique one growing here off of this red alder log. So fun to see. I suppose that while we're on the topic of turkey tail, it's worth pointing out, so here we've got a big leaf maple that came down, and this is just like feet from that turkey tail that we saw. Over here, I can see growing off of this big leaf maple, so this is now upside down to how it was oriented before, but we've got a massive fruiting of what is a common turkey tail look-alike. So in case you haven't seen in prior videos, this is what's known as Stereum, or false turkey tail. Stereum hirsutum. And if we look underneath this, notice that we've got kind of an orange buff surface. So this is definitely lacking those fine white pored surface that we saw on the turkey tail. So quite a bit different, and an easy one to distinguish, but at the same time, one that's oftentimes mistaken for turkey tail. And you can kind of see why. Banded colors, and it's kind of got a similar feel to it, right? So something to be on the lookout for, and just to be able to differentiate from the turkey tail, the one that we're after. So if you did mistake this for turkey tail, it's probably not a huge deal. This is non-toxic, so it's just not as studied. Probably has medicinal capabilities as well, but definitely not as well studied as the turkey tail, so there's more questions than answers when it comes to this one. But cool to see, and good to be able to know the difference between those two. Here on this big leaf maple, aside from nice little young fruiting of turkey tail, as we look down this log, this is more of like a small branch than a log, we've got kind of a cool one. So this is definitely kind of like, you know, the remains of what was a more viable fruiting body, but this is what's known as the Candlesnuff fungus. So when this is, you know, fresh and when it's combined with a dry climate, this will actually let off an incredible volume of spores with just the slightest touch. And so, like, that's where it gets its name. It's kind of like snuffing a candle. When you touch this thing, it appears to have smoke coming off of the tip of it. So, kind of a cool one to see. You may have seen this earlier in the year, again, when it was a little bit more vibrant, but kind of, you know, a drab thing even when it's fresh, but super interesting and very fun to look at. I always love admiring these. So again, that's the Candlesnuff fungus. And boy, we just keep seeing it here. For February, I tell you, turkey tail is really out and doing its thing. And look at this guy here on the end of this log. What a nice, vibrant little turkey tail. Whew. I tell you, so fun to look at. I've heard it said too by the likes of Christopher Hobbs, who wrote, you know, a really excellent book on medicinal mushrooms. He claims that the darker that these are in color, the more medicinal they are. So kind of an interesting thing. I don't know the backstory of that or how that's been arrived at, but just an interesting thing. This is a really handsome turkey tail here with certainly some dark colors and banding to it. So very fun to see. And just coming up the trail here, I noticed something on the side of the trail up here that's kind of becoming pretty typical experience for the last several weeks. Each time I'm out on the trail, I'm noticing these. So those of you who have tuned in to recent videos, I'm sure will recognize this one. This is what I believe is either Plectania milleri or Pseudo-Plectania nigrella. So I did get some, you know, questions about this on the last video. Other people are also seeing this currently right now in the Pacific Northwest. And what I've found is that this can be very difficult to distinguish or to, you know, determine exactly which species this is in the field. So one way to do that would be to get this under a microscope and to closely examine the spores. So if this is in fact Plectania milleri, we expect to see, you know, kind of elliptical shaped spores, so spores that have the shape of an ellipse. Whereas if it's the other one, Pseudo-Plectania nigrella, that's going to have circular spores. So that's the best way that I know to differentiate these. Now, I will add that, you know, as I've been doing more and more research on this, I am seeing different species of Plectania, you know, like kind of undocumented species or subspecies of Plectania milleri that are being sequenced and sourced right here in Western Washington. So super interesting to see. Definitely enjoying this becoming a familiar sight out here. So I'm curious to learn more about it. If this is something that you have knowledge on, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Would love to just kind of expand my awareness and knowledge of this one. But just to recap real quickly, the underside of this, so there's very subtle or slight stem or stipe, and then it's slightly hairy or tomentose underneath. So so super fun to see. Keep your eyes peeled. Definitely out. It's seemingly in abundance right now. So let me know if you're seeing this one. And boy, right next to this guy, as I look more carefully at the surroundings, notice really tiny cups. So just to give you a little perspective, here's my finger. Super small, super subtle little guys. Here's another one up here. You can see though on these small ones, a little bit of a more pronounced stipe. So super interesting. Keep your eyes peeled. They're certainly out here. Easy to miss though, because they do kind of blend in until you really make the acquaintance, right? Then I think they're more likely to jump out at you. But cool to see. So keep an eye out, you know, if you're seeing these too. And just up here on the side of the trail, we've got one fruiting out fresh here. So this is Really cool mushroom to see here. It's coming out of a big leaf maple. It's down, so dead, decaying hardwood. This is what's known as the wild enoki. It's also sometimes referred to as the velvet shank or the velvet foot. This is a really incredible mushroom, both a choice edible and a medicinal. You can see, so, you know, all of these older kind of dingy looking things that you see around this is actually the old flush of enoki. So I did feature this several weeks back, and it had kind of run its course and just kind of did its thing out here. But we now have a fresh fruiting of this, and boy, look at that. You can see just some really new growth coming out right there. This is definitely a cold weather mushroom, so it doesn't mind the cold weather. In fact, it thrives during winter. When a lot of other species have kind of packed it up for the year and called it good, this is going in full force. So very cool mushroom to see, one that I love just to admire. You know, you can see the white gill structure underneath. The top of this cap can be rather slimy, and it has that kind of caramel appearance to it. So really pretty mushroom, and like I said before, this is excellent for the table and excellent for you know, its medicinal capabilities as well. Now, one thing that's really important to know about this one is that it could be easily mistaken or confused with you know, very toxic mushrooms, specifically the deadly Xylaria or the funeral bell. So one of the things that separates this, probably the key distinguishing feature, is it's going to have a white spore print. Also notice at the base of this, so if I zoom in here, you can see a little dark velvety formation. So in age, that'll become more and more pronounced. Also, you know, there's a partial little annulus or collar that's on the deadly Xylaria that is not showing up on this wild enoki. So really pretty mushroom to see. Again, super excited to see this flush kind of coming back to life here. So you might remember from several weeks back, this was growing, and right next to it was a purple jelly disc. We talked about the mycodiesel mushroom, but those have pretty much run their course. You can see what remains of that right here. So quite faded and losing its luster a little bit, but really cool to see this enoki still going strong. So might have to keep an eye on this, and if it gets more pronounced, I might have to come out and harvest some of this. So keep your eyes peeled for the wild enoki, and that is Flammulina velutipes is the Latin or scientific name for that. So very cool to see. So just moving down the trail here, you can see we've got plenty of stuff to look at. So just over here, we've got a pretty large troop of Mycena species. These are collectively known as the bonnets, and we've featured these in recent videos. Again, just a pretty huge group of small mushrooms that oftentimes fruit in abundance out here. Those can be difficult to distinguish from one another because of the sheer volume. As we look across the trail over here, we've got quite a bit going on. So we can see some old, it looks like sap from the stug fir that's just kind of running down the end of this log. We've also got on top some what appears to be very old Stereum. So we can see that just kind of doing its thing here. But then right next to this, with the beads of gutacean, we've got one of my favorites. So this is what's known as the Rosy Conk, Rhodophome scaganderi. And notice, boy, those pretty kind of red and amber-like beads. We see more of that over here to the left. So let me just pan over there. Boy, just look at that. Beautiful to look at. So we discussed this one in terms of being a potential medicinal. We looked at this a couple weeks back, and one of the things, I'm not sure if you all noticed, but when I was editing that particular thumbnail photo, I noticed that there was a bug actually swimming through the gutacean. which is just wild to think about. And it made me really reflect on some of the things that I've heard Paul Stamets reference in relation to the way that bees in particular rely on a lot of the guttation from these conchs and just interacting with the mycelium that's in a lot of this decaying wood to boost their immune systems. And he was actually looking at potential links between saving bee populations and really preserving a lot of these fungi. So it just made me wonder, wow, I wonder if, you know, different insects are utilizing this guttation and the potential bioactive compounds contained within these metabolites to boost their own immune systems and to do well out here in the forest. So just an interesting little side note, something to think about. But boy, always so fun to see, especially when we've got this fresh guttation just bubbling out. So we'll see. So again, that's the Rosy Conk, Rhodophome scaganderi. Just up here, another fruiting of what has become a very common sight out here. This is the alpine jellycone, Whippiniopsis alpina, also known as the poor man's gumdrop. So one of the very few mushrooms in the forest that's edible raw. So cool to see. Coming just up the trail, one of my all-time favorite mushroom spots. Check this out. So with the weather warming up a little bit, I've been noticing a lot of bear activity out here. And if you take a look at this tree, sometimes bears will do this. They'll come up to these trees and just kind of do their best to kind of go to town on these. So you can see a big slash there, and you can also see some deep bites in the bark here and here. So kind of cool to see. Very unexpected, but it looks like they're out and about doing their thing. So kind of cool. So keep your eyes out if you're here in the Pacific Northwest. Looks like the bears are active and getting out and about with this warmer kind of unseasonal weather. They may be on the prowl, so fun to see. And in prior videos, I know I've referenced sometimes how, you know, even though I'm a little excited to see those Dyer's Polypore, Phaeolus schweineitzii, also I'm sometimes sad. And here's a prime example of that. So beautiful, big, old Doug fir growing right here. And if we look down at the base of this thing, notice that here it is, the Dyer's Polypore. So this guy, obviously last season's fruiting, but we can see it coming right out of the base of this beautiful old Doug fir. And again, like we've referenced before, this is an absolutely sure sign that this big old Doug fir is kind of not long of this world, which is kind of a shame, because boy, what a beauty this is. Couldn't even come close to getting my arms around this guy. I just wonder how many years this tree has seen in the same spot here in the forest. So again, kind of the harbinger of things to come down here with the Dyer's Polypore. So interesting to see. Keep your eyes out for it. This is obviously quite old fruiting body, but again, when they're young, they'll tend to be like an orange yellowish color. And as referenced before, these are highly desired by folks who dye protein fabrics, so the wools and the silks. So kind of cool to see, but also a bit of a shame. Just moving up the trail here. Very difficult to see, but if you look at this standing, we've got a red alder snag here. So you can see this is no longer a living tree. And if you look closely, boy, you have to really look. But you can see a very small fruiting body starting to come out here. Very cool to see. This is a very much welcome spring sight. Again, a little early. I usually don't see this in February, but this is actually a very tiny oyster mushroom that if I actually look further down this snag, I notice down here too, just small little beginnings, right? So all of this is likely to be ripe with oyster mushrooms over the course of the next several days. So this is a spot that I'll keep my eye on. Right now, currently not big enough to harvest, but boy, I sure do love seeing those oysters start to fruit out. So welcome sight here in February in the Pacific Northwest. Keep your eyes peeled. Well, that concludes another great day out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. If you're liking what you're seeing out here, remember to hit that subscribe button, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time out here on the Mushroom Trail. Until then, happy trails.